Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're diving into the world of 21st century psychology.
Oh, exciting.
It is. And we're using this chapter from an Open University textbook. It's called Mapping Psychology 1.
Okay, great.
And I think it's going to give us a really good crash course in how psychologists actually go about learning about people.
Yeah.
The methods they use, how the field has evolved, all that good stuff. So I think it'll be really interesting.
It's a field that really, you encounter every day. You might not even realize it.
That's so true.
Yeah.
How often do we hear about, evolutionary origins of behavior or debates about whether therapy really works?
Right, right. It's everywhere, these ideas.
It really is. It's kind of
Yeah.
psychology's become common sense almost.
Absolutely, yeah. The idea that childhood experiences shape you as an adult.
Right.
That's the psychological concept that's become just common knowledge, really.
Yeah. Okay, so these ideas are everywhere, but where did they actually, where did they come from? When did psychology become a formal discipline?
Well, the late 19th century was really key. I mean, think about Darwin, meticulously observing his infant son's behavior,
Oh, wow.
and Wundt setting up the first psychology lab in 1879.
So from baby diaries to labs.
Yeah, exactly. Quite a leap.
Yeah.
And it didn't stop there, of course. I mean, the field has gone through some really major shifts in thinking.
Okay.
In the 1960s, there was this thing called the cognitive revolution, which really changed the game.
The cognitive revolution.
Yeah. So before that, psychology was mainly focused on observable behavior, what you could see people doing.
Uh-huh.
But then the cognitive revolution, it shifted the attention to the internal mental processes, how we think, remember, solve problems.
That's zooming in.
It's like zooming in from the outward actions to what's going on inside the mind.
Wow, that is revolutionary.
Yeah, it really was. And more recently, there's been a growing awareness of, how language and culture shape our understanding of the world, even of ourselves.
Yeah.
So psychology is constantly adapting, trying to better reflect the incredible complexity of human experience.
So we've got this really dynamic, ever-evolving field. But how do psychologists actually gather evidence? What tools do they use? What's in their toolbox?
Well, they use a whole diverse range of data, and each kind provides a different window into the human experience. It's
Yeah.
almost like having different lenses for a camera.
I like that, different lenses.
Okay.
What are some of the lenses?
Okay, so you've got behavioral data, which is all about what we can observe and measure.
Okay.
So, things like reaction time in an experiment,
Uh-huh.
or even things like, truancy rates in a school.
Right, so it's quantifying what people do.
Yeah, exactly. Then you have personal accounts, which is where things get a little more nuanced. It's about tapping into subjective experiences and interpretations. So think about analyzing dreams or conducting in-depth interviews to really understand someone's perspective.
Oh, that's interesting, the insider view.
Exactly, yeah. And then there's material data, which is hard evidence from the body and the brain.
Okay.
Hormone levels, brain imaging, genetic analysis. This is a way to explore the biological foundations of, our thoughts and behaviors.
So understand the physical mechanisms behind it all.
Right. And finally, there's symbolic data. This is all about the creations of the mind.
Okay.
Things like written texts, art, patterns in language. It's a way to explore the deeper meaning embedded in our creative expressions.
So from actions to brainwaves to art. It's amazing how many different ways psychologists can gather information.
It is, yeah. And each type of data has its strengths and weaknesses, and they're often used in combination to get a more complete picture.
Okay.
So, for example, behavioral data gives you these objective measurements, but personal accounts give those valuable insights into subjective experiences.
I see. So they kind of work together.
They work together, yeah. And that leads us to the research process itself. It's like this systematic journey that starts with a clear question, something that can be answered through research.
Okay.
Right? So it's not just about exploring interesting ideas. It's about formulating specific testable questions.
Yeah.
And once you have your question, you review any existing research on the topic, you carefully define your variables, and then you choose the right tools for the job,
Yeah.
Will you use experiments, questionnaires, interviews, observations? That all depends on the research question.
So it's choosing the right lens.
It is. It is. And from there, it's all about analyzing the data and seeing if it actually supports or maybe even refutes your initial hypothesis.
It sounds very meticulous and organized.
It is. And remember, psychology is constantly evolving, so the research process is an ongoing cycle of asking questions, gathering data, refining theories, asking new questions.
Okay. So we've got this dynamic field, the tools, the process. But what about the people being studied? Like, how does ethics fit into all of this?
Yeah, that's a crucial aspect, and thankfully it's one that's received a lot more attention over the years. I mean, it's not just about finding answers, it's about finding them responsibly,
That makes sense.
you know? And this concern has led to the development of like really strict ethical guidelines for psychological research. So organizations like the British Psychological Society now have these very clear ethical principles that guide every study.
What are some of those, like, key principles?
Well, informed consent is really important. Participants need to understand what the research involves and they need to freely agree to participate.
Hmm.
Confidentiality is also crucial to protect the privacy of individuals. And then, of course, minimizing harm, both physical and psychological, is a fundamental principle.
So it's about respecting the people involved.
Exactly. And this commitment to ethical research, I think, is really a hallmark of modern psychology.
It sounds like the field has really, like, learned from its past. It's made significant strides in making sure that things are done ethically.
Definitely. And that dedication to responsible research is what allows psychology to keep exploring the complexities of human behavior in a way that benefits, both individuals and society as a whole.
Okay, wow. So we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
We talked about the dynamic evolution of psychology, the diverse ways of studying people, and, the importance of ethical practices.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling like I have a much better grasp of how psychology actually works.
I'm glad to hear that. And we've only just scratched the surface. This chapter also dives into this fascinating concept of identity, which I think we should explore next.
Okay, let's dive deeper
Let's do it.
into the mysteries of the self. Okay, so we're moving on to this concept of identity. I mean, where do we even begin to unpack such a huge idea?
Right. It's complex.
So, like, trying to define, what makes you you.
Yeah. But luckily, this chapter kind of lays out some fascinating theories to help us grapple with it.
Okay, let's hear them. I'm ready.
Okay, well, one of the most influential ones is Erikson's psychosocial theory of identity.
Uh-huh.
You might have heard of him. He's the one who coined the term, identity crisis.
Oh, yeah. So it's not just a teenage phase.
Not at all. Erikson saw identity as like a process that unfolds throughout our whole lives.
Okay.
With different challenges at each stage. But adolescence is definitely like a key period. He called it identity versus role confusion.
Okay.
So it's when you're really wrestling with like who you are, your beliefs, your place in the world.
It's like trying on different hats to see which one fits.
Exactly, yeah. And according to Erikson, if you don't successfully navigate this stage, you can end up in role diffusion, which means, lacking a solid sense of self.
Yeah, that sounds like it could lead to some serious uncertainty.
It can, but how do you even measure something as abstract as identity status?
Right.
Erikson didn't have a method for that, but one of his followers, a guy named James Marcia, he kind of expanded on his ideas.
Okay, tell me about Marcia. What did he do?
Well, Marcia, he developed this system for classifying individuals into different identity statuses based on two key factors.
Okay.
Exploration and commitment.
So how much you're actively kind of searching for your identity, and then how firm you are in your choices.
Exactly. Yeah. So first you have identity diffusion.
Okay.
These are folks who haven't really explored different possibilities or made any firm commitments.
Yeah.
They're kind of drifting along, not actively trying to figure it out.
Like lost at sea with no compass or destination.
A perfect analogy. Then you have identity foreclosure.
Okay.
And these individuals, they've made commitments, but without much exploration. They might just adopt their parents' values without questioning them.
Oh, so they're following like a predetermined path, not forging their own.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And then there's moratorium, the classic identity crisis stage. These folks are the active explorers, questioning everything, trying on different identities, but they haven't landed on any strong commitments yet.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that stage.
Right. A bit overwhelming.
Yeah, but exciting too,
Full of possibilities. And finally, you have identity achievement.
Okay.
These individuals have gone through the exploration, wrestled with their options, and come out with a clear sense of who they are and what they believe in.
That sounds like the ultimate goal. Like a sense of self-awareness and a firm foundation for moving forward.
It is. And it's important to remember these aren't fixed categories. People can move between them throughout their lives as they encounter new challenges and experiences.
So identity's dynamic. It's always evolving.
Precisely. Now, while Erikson and Marcia were really focused on the individual, There's another theory called social identity theory that looks at the role of groups in shaping who we are.
Okay, so how does belonging to groups affect our identity?
Well, this theory, it was developed by Henri Tachfel, and he argued that we define ourselves not just by our individual traits, but also by the groups that we belong to.
Okay.
So these are our social
So
identities.
things like nationality, ethnicity, gender, even like your favorite sports team, like all that
Ah,
contributes.
all of that. Absolutely. And according to Tajfel, we're really motivated to see our groups in a positive light.
Okay.
And this can lead to what's called in-group bias, which is like favoring your own group over others.
Like my team, right or wrong kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And this drive for a positive social identity, it can have good and bad consequences.
Oh,
It can create a sense of belonging and solidarity, but it can also lead to prejudice against those outside of your group.
a double-edged sword.
It is very powerful force in shaping, our views and actions. Now, shifting gears a bit, our chapter also introduces this concept of social constructionism.
Social constructionism.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the core idea there?
So, social constructionism, it kind of challenges the idea that our understanding of the world, including our own identities, is just like a reflection of some objective reality out there.
So you're saying reality is subjective.
Well, shaped by our social interactions and the language that we use. Yeah, it's not that there's no external world,
Yeah.
but our interpretations of it are always filtered through these social and cultural lenses.
That makes sense. I mean, think about how different cultures view concepts like beauty or family or success.
Right.
It's not universally fixed.
Exactly. And this applies to our identities as well.
Okay.
So social constructionists argue that our sense of self isn't innate or unchanging. It's something that we actively construct through our interactions with others.
So the way we talk about ourselves, the roles we play, the stories we tell, all of that helps shape who we believe we are.
Right, and it's an ongoing, fluid process, and it's influenced by power dynamics in our social world, like whose voices get heard, whose definitions of identity actually hold sway. These are key questions for social constructionists.
Wow, this is like a whole other layer of complexity to this whole identity puzzle.
Yeah.
It's not just about individual introspection, but it's about understanding how our sense of self is shaped by like these larger social forces.
Exactly. And our chapter gives a really compelling example of how these social forces can kind of clash and intersect. The Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas hearings back in the 90s.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So Hill accused Thomas, who was a Supreme Court nominee, of sexual harassment.
Right.
And the case sparked this huge national debate about race, gender, power.
It did.
And people interpreted the events very differently,
Yeah.
through the lens of their own social identities. So it was a really powerful illustration of how our perceptions of reality, even like what we see as truth, can be shaped by our group affiliations and the categories that we identify with.
So what we see as truth can be heavily influenced by like who we are and the groups we belong to.
Yes. And this example really highlights a key concept in social constructionism. Power is relational. It emerges from those social interactions and the dynamics between different groups.
So it's about who gets to define what's true, whose voices are amplified, whose experiences are believed.
Right. And those power dynamics, they play a crucial role in shaping how we see ourselves and our place in the world.
Okay, so we've gone from Erickson's stages to Tashfel's social groups to this social constructionist view of identity as like fluid and relational.
Right.
It's a lot.
It is. But a key takeaway is that identity is not this simple, fixed thing, It's multifaceted, dynamic, and it's constantly being negotiated within this complex tapestry of our social world.
It's a process, not a product.
Exactly. Now, our material kind of takes another interesting turn here.
Okay.
It explores how even our physical experiences, our bodies, shape our sense of self.
Okay.
This is the idea of embodied identities.
So it's about how our bodies, our abilities, our limitations become intertwined with who we are.
Right. And the text points out how this is particularly relevant for people with physical disabilities.
Yeah, that makes sense. They often face these societal pressures to define themselves by their disability rather than seeing themselves as just, whole individuals.
Right. Unfortunately, that's true. And it can lead to these feelings of marginalization, of being othered, and a struggle to really define oneself on one's own terms.
It reminds us that identity isn't just an abstract idea. It's rooted in our lived experiences, in our bodies, in our interactions with the world.
Precisely. And this leads us to the question of how all these different theories of identity can help us understand the experiences of people with disabilities.
Okay, so how do they apply in this context? What insights can they offer?
Well, each theory has its strengths and limitations when it comes to understanding these embodied identities.
Okay, let's start with Erickson and Marcia. How do their theories kind of hold up?
Well, they acknowledge the role of the body, especially in terms of the challenges that we face at different life stages.
Hmm.
But they tend to focus on what's considered like normal development, assuming a trajectory that might not apply to everyone.
So their theories might not fully capture the unique challenges faced by people whose bodies, you know, don't conform to those societal expectations.
Exactly. For example, the idea of an identity crisis as like a necessary step toward achievement, it might not resonate with someone whose physical limitations have always been central to their experience.
So these theories, while valuable, might need some adjustments to fully account for, the diversity of embodied experiences.
That's a fair point. Now, what about social identity theory? How does that fit in here?
Well, it seems like it could be very helpful in understanding how people with disabilities kind of form group identities.
Mhm.
Finding solidarity in a world that often stigmatizes them.
Absolutely. Social identity theory really illuminates the power of like collective identity, finding strength and empowerment by connecting with others who share similar experiences.
It's about reclaiming a positive sense of self in the face of that societal prejudice.
Exactly. And this might involve strategies like, challenging negative stereotypes, advocating for greater inclusion, and celebrating the diversity of embodied experiences.
Turning a perceived weakness into a source of, collective power and pride.
Yeah, it is. It's a powerful concept. And finally, how about social constructionism? What does it bring to the table?
Well, it seems perfectly suited to deconstruct the very categories that we use to define people with disabilities.
Precisely. Social constructionism challenges the idea that disability is some fixed inherent trait.
Mm.
It argues that these categories are socially constructed. They're shaped by cultural norms, power dynamics, and the language that we use.
So instead of seeing disability as an objective fact,
Mm.
we need to understand how it's defined and experienced within specific social contexts.
Exactly. And that includes examining, who benefits from these definitions, who's marginalized, and how language itself can perpetuate stigma and exclusion.
So it's about moving beyond those simplistic labels
Right.
and recognizing this complex web of social factors that shape how disability is understood and lived.
You got it. And this raises a really interesting question. Do people with disabilities have like one core identity based on their impairment? Or do they have multiple fluid identities that kind of shift depending on the context?
That's a fascinating question.
It is.
It gets to the heart of whether our identities are fixed
Yeah.
or flexible.
Right. And our chapter suggests that people with disabilities, like everyone else, they construct and negotiate their identities in relation to different social contexts.
So their identity as a disabled person might be more salient in certain situations, like when they're facing accessibility barriers, while other aspects of their identity might take center stage in different contexts.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the complexity and the fluidity of human experience. The multiple ways that we define ourselves and are defined by others.
It reminds us that we're all more than just one label or category.
Right.
Our identities are these tapestries woven from experiences, influences, and choices over time.
Yeah, beautifully put. And that's actually a perfect segue into our next topic, which is the development of identity over the lifespan.
Okay, let's talk about that. It's really amazing how this deep dive into identity has brought us back to the very heart of psychology. We started by exploring how psychologists actually study people.
Mhm.
And now we're thinking about these really deep questions of, what makes us who we are.
It is a fascinating journey for sure. And as we've seen, one of the biggest challenges for psychologists is, how to balance all these different perspectives, the biological, the social, the individual, to create this holistic understanding of human behavior.
It's about really embracing that complexity.
Yeah.
And moving away from these simplistic explanations,
Well,
recognizing that there isn't always one right answer, and appreciating that there are multiple ways to approach the same question,
yeah.
each offering its own unique insights.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this field so, captivating.
It is.
It's a continuous process of exploration, questioning, and kind of refining our understanding of ourselves and the world.
It's humbling and incredibly exciting at the same time.
It is. And, for anyone who wants to delve deeper, our chapter recommends checking out the British Psychological Society's website.
That's a great resource, yeah. You can explore research areas, career paths, stay updated on the latest. It's a great starting point for anyone feeling inspired to learn more.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what stands out to you? What's resonating most strongly?
Honestly, it's just the sheer breadth and depth of this whole field. From studying how the brain works to the nuances of social interaction, psychology truly touches every aspect of human experience.
It does, and it's a field that never stands still. It's constantly evolving, pushing boundaries, challenging assumptions, and offering these new perspectives on who we are and why we do the things that we do.
And that actually brings me to a thought I want to leave with our listeners. Now that you've gotten a glimpse into how psychologists go about studying human behavior, what aspects of your own behavior or experiences are you most curious about? What questions are swirling around in your mind? Hold on to those questions, embrace that curiosity, and never stop exploring this fascinating world within you and around you.
That's a fantastic point to end on. The journey of self-discovery is an ongoing one. Embrace those complexities, the contradictions, and the constant evolution of what it means to be human.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.